fat and carbs together. From an evolutionary point of view, lack of regular access to food and seasonal scarcity of carbohydrates made it necessary for the body to develop pathways where we could readily store and access body fat for energy. Cells can adapt to different types of energy, and this adaptation is crucial, and it's achieved through several regulatory mechanisms that control our energy and its utilization. In this video, I will be talking about why the body likes clear messaging on which fuel it is predominantly using in a meal. So for those of you that don't know me, hi, my name is Sam Brown and I am a BANT registered nutritionist here in the UK. And on my channel, I am typically talking about the science-backed information on anything nutrition and lifestyle. So if this is the kind of thing that you like, please click that subscribe. Our bodies are incredibly sophisticated and are generally able to switch between fuels depending on what's available to it. But in recent times, as food is overly abundant, we are starting to see a dependence on glucose as its primary fuel source. And with that comes diseases of an energy surplus. The body is able to store energy during times of famine, ready for release when it is required. But generally these days, there are no long periods of famine in the developed world. So normally, energy metabolism is characterized by periodic shifts between glucose and fat oxidation. So that just means that we have periods of using sugar for fuel and periods of using fat for fuel. The mitochondria, which you can think of as our little power factories inside each and every cell, make this decision on what is available nutritionally within our body. So with a diet that is high in glucose, the onset of insulin resistance can come quite early on. Insulin helps control the utilization of glucose, fatty acids and amino acids via the mitochondria, those little powerhouses. The use of too much glucose in the diet creates this inability to be able to switch from one fuel to the other in the mitochondria. This is termed metabolic inflexibility and actually deteriorates your metabolic health. The mitochondria is supposed to choose fats when the glucose levels are low. Now, fat is an abundance of energy for most tissues within the body, but the brain likes glucose. So by the mitochondria switching to fats and saving the glucose from the brain, it protects us from hypoglycemia. And this is generally during a fasted state or prolonged periods of exercise. The two hormones that have a regulatory role in this is insulin and glucagon. Now, I've spoken before about insulin being our fat storing hormone, and if you haven't already, check out this video here. But essentially, when we eat high sugar foods, the insulin helps the glucose get into the cell, and when the cells and the tissues are full, the body turns it into fat and it gets stored into our fatty tissue. Well, glucagon is the opposite. It raises the concentration of fatty acids from our stores ready for our mitochondria to use, and this is where intermittent fasting comes in really handy to help that metabolic adaptation. So in a fed state, the mitochondria will always choose glucose as its fuel source. These transitions between fasting and a fed state send signals to the mitochondria of which fuel it's going to choose. So if the glucose is low and the fatty acids are high, that glucose oxidation or the use of glucose for fuel will be inhibited or slowed down. So when we go back to the evolution of human beings, we have evolved to cope with these fluctuations of feast and famine, hunting, gathering, and typically a refeeding state was preceded by periods of famine. So by contrast now, we have this steady influx of competing fuels. And this study show is leading to a metabolic inflexibility. The mitochondria is in this constant state of indecision, and actually oxidizing all three fuels can really affect your health and wellness goals. This has not only been connected to obesity or being overweight, but also polycystic ovary syndrome, heart disease, diabetes, and physical inactivity. So think of it this way: rush hour. During the day, in normal times, you're driving along, the cars are nice and spaced, the traffic lights have got everything under control, it's smooth and it's easy. But as the traffic builds and it becomes rush hour, you get bottlenecks. And it can get to the point where the traffic lights are not controlling anything anymore and nobody is moving. It's the same with the mitochondria. People are eating heavy saturated fats with refined carbohydrates and protein in a meal. The competition for the fuel breakdown intensifies and the mitochondria feel that burden. So what can we do? Intermittent fasting just describes a variety of eating patterns where you have an eating window and a fasting window, and this can be anything from 12 hours to even a few days. Now, I have my personal favorites and you can see them in this video here where I describe what they are and how they work. So, at the point of a negative energy balance, which is where all the glycogen stores, these are just glucose stores within the body, have been used up. Now this typically happens in and around that 12-hour mark after your last meal. The metabolic switch gets flicked and fats are then mobilized into the body where the mitochondria can then start using them as fuel. This process actually protects your muscle mass and its function. Intermittent fasting regimes that are able to flick that metabolic switch are able to help improve body composition in overweight individuals, but actually in normal weight individuals that are just wanting to increase their muscle mass and reduce the fat in their body. These intermittent fasting regimes induce signaling pathways within the body that increase our function, they increase our performance, but also slow down the aging process, and who doesn't love that? But they also help prevent diseases as well. So this is where breaking your fast with protein, fats and fiber keeps the mitochondria using fats as its primary fuel, and so that rush hour is avoided. You can check this video out on protein, fats and fiber for more information. This is why I love intermittent fasting. While you are using intermittent fasting, the signal to the mitochondria is incredibly clear. You are only using stored body fats as fuel. There is no fuel competition for the mitochondria. Food grouping is another thing that you can do. So there is a time for fats and a time for carbs. Now, I'm not against either food, but the signaling pathway for the mitochondria is very different. So to feed your body on one substrate at a time gives a very clear signal to the mitochondria, and then you can maximize the benefit out of that nutrient. Having periods of time where you switch your meals between fats and carbs is really important for that flexibility. If you solely concentrate on one, you can become intolerant or unable to oxidize the other for energy. So for me, I like to use intermittent fasting, and 16/8 is my favorite. I then also concentrate my food on protein, fats and fiber until my final meal. This is where I add in that little bit of carbohydrate, and it's usually some sweet potato or maybe some brown rice, something that is nice and slow burning. I also have this meal somewhere between 3 and 4 hours minimum before I go to bed, so that that digestion has time to happen. Now, there are studies that this helps increase the amount of serotonin in the body, which is a precursor to melatonin, and I do find that I get sleepy after carbohydrates, so it's a great time to add them in for me. If you go to bed that little bit later though, it will be a good idea to maybe switch this around and have it as your afternoon meal so that you have time to utilize those carbs and you go to bed on a different regime. There are lots of ways that you can switch your carbs and your fats. Some people like to go through periods of very low carbs and then have a couple of days of carb feeding, as I do it. Some people like to have the odd meal out of the day. It really depends on what fits into your life. So as always guys, if you've enjoyed the information in this video, please give me a like and a subscribe, click the little bell icon, and I shall see you next week.